My name is Marvin Rice. I was born in February 1934. Actually, I was born about a mile east of Prairie Grove on a place where this rock in front of the church came from. Same place.
Where was that place?
Well, it's east of where Billy Joe Bartholomew lives, up on a hill there.
Okay. And my name is Scott Davis, and I'm doing this project as part of the Prairie Grove Oral History Project. And we just want to be sure that you know we'll be using your interviews and that we have to rebroadcast them and that we want to be sure we have your permission.
Right.
Okay, so we have your permission.
I understand, yeah.
Who were your parents?
Mary and Dallas Rice.
And tell me about your brothers and sisters, if you had any.
Well, yeah, I had four brothers and, well, actually 3 brothers and 3 sisters. So 7 of us all together.
Okay, and what were their names?
Well, there's Bobby, Donnie, Jerry, Betty Lou, Carol, and Linda.
Okay, thank you. Well, tell me about your family growing up as a child. What was it like at your home? Where did y'all live and what y'all do?
We lived between Center Point and New Sulphur. My dad was a farmer until World War II started. And without any men around Prairie Grove that did carpenter work, Dad rode a horse to Prairie Grove just about every day to do carpenter work.
Okay, so your dad was a farmer and also a carpenter?
Carpenter, yeah.
What was your part in the family business?
Basically, my part was doing the chores, and on Saturday I usually had to help Dad on whatever carpenter project he was working on.
Tell me about the chores that you would do on the farm when you were a young kid growing up.
Well, my part of the chores was getting the wood in for Mom to cook, and also getting the milking started. We had milk cows, usually 9 or 10 milk cows. All this was done by hand, and that was my daily chores.
So, would you use a chopping axe? Tell me about preparing the wood. How did you get it, and how did you prepare it?
Our wood was cut into lengths, and I had to split it with an axe. You get pretty good with an axe with enough practice.
So all of your heat at home, was that from wood and the cooking?
All of our heat was from wood. They didn't have gas out there in the rural. In fact, Prairie Grove didn't have gas at that time. I've helped haul wood into Prairie Grove for heating. Other than the wood, a lot of people use coal, especially the stores had coal at that time.
What about electricity?
We didn't have electricity in the beginning. We used coal oil for light, and I remember when it came through, the electric company came through setting poles and stringing wire, and we eventually got electricity.
Do you remember what year? About when?
It was about 1940, along in there somewhere. I don't remember the exact year.
What kind of appliances or uses of electricity did you have at your home initially?
Well, to start off with, we just had one light bulb in each room, and that was, of course, we had we could plug in appliances, but we didn't have anything. Just used an old ice box. We didn't have a refrigerator.
Where would you get your ice? Let's talk about that. How'd that work?
Well, we got our ice from a filling station in Prairie Grove. Had a little building out back where they brought ice down every other day. So they kept ice for people around town and out of town too. We hauled it home in a wagon. We didn't have a car, didn't have a vehicle.
When did you get your first vehicle at home?
That was Dad got an old car back during the war. He needed transportation and to haul his carpenter tools, so he could quit riding a horse to town every day to work. And he took the back end out of the old car and built a wooden box back there to haul his carpenter tools. That was during the war.
How many people did the car seat with that back fitted for tools?
Well, this was a coupe, so only 3 people could ride in the front. And if they was going to take us kids to town or somewhere, part of us had to ride in the back, in the box outside.
Tell me about your family routines. Who did which chores? How did that work at home? If you remember.
Well, I don't remember that much about the chores, except preparing the wood. Of course, we had to carry water. We didn't have plumbing or anything, so we had to carry well water. I did a lot of that, and I was the oldest of the kids, so it was my responsibility to keep ahead on the water and the wood and that sort of thing. And we had an old reel type push lawnmower, so we didn't do a lot of lawn mowing, just mainly where we had to walk.
The self-propelled the reel, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I propelled it, yeah.
But it wasn't gas powered or anything?
No, it wasn't gas powered.
What was it like using that old mower? Was it really hard?
Well, it wasn't all that easy. You had to sharpen it once in a while and make sure it cut good. It wasn't all that hard to push, except in tall grass. It got pretty difficult.
What about your sister and your mom? What kind of chores would they do?
Well, Mom did everything. When I was older than my sisters, didn't come along for a while.
Oh, okay.
And my brother Bobby and I even did the dishes before school nearly every day. My sisters, they were pretty much babies at that time.
Okay. What other jobs did you work besides helping out around the house? Did you help your dad with carpentry projects in town or anything like that?
Well, especially on Saturday, if he had a concrete job going or a roofing job or something like that where he needed extra help, I found out pretty quick that I didn't want to work at concrete or I didn't want to do roofing.
Why is that?
That's that's two of the roughest, the hardest jobs in building.
Okay. Tell me about your early memories of coming to Prairie Grove and how often would you come to town?
My memories of being in Prairie Grove, I was probably 4 or 5 years old. I can remember the old railroad tracks when we'd come to Prairie Grove. The tracks run between the old canning company and also the old building where they ground food, or feed, I should say. They left the tracks there even after the trains quit running. And also, where we lived out about New Sulphur, that's where they crushed the stonework to pave the 62 highway. I can remember the trucks running back and forth with hauling the gravel to pave 62. And I don't remember, that was probably in the late 30s, like 38 or 39. It might have been as late as 40, I don't remember.
But you remember coming in town on a wagon? Let's talk about that. How long would it take, and when would you come to town to do that?
Well, we only came to town on a Saturday and came in a wagon, and it'd take about probably 20 or 30 minutes. It seemed like longer than that as a kid. But later on, I could walk it in less than that. So I know it didn't take all that long. We either came to town in a wagon or we walked.
And what would you do once you got to town?
Well, when we came to town, it was to buy groceries mainly. Back then they had big crowds on Saturdays. We'd park the wagon back behind the stores. You didn't park in front of the stores. There were what few cars there was in town parked in front. And they had what's called Trades Day on Saturday, once a month. And the town would be full of people until after the trades, we'd get our groceries and go home.
Tell me about the drawings they would do and how much fun that was.
Oh yeah, I don't remember what they drew for. Probably money. I don't remember. I was too small. But everybody was excited to get a chance to win at the Trades Day.
Now, let's talk about people. They came to town to buy stuff, but wasn't there a social aspect to the trip to town? Let's talk about that.
Well, you got to meet all your neighbors when you came to town. And there's also a few people that came to Prairie Grove that liked to fight. They had fights sometimes on Saturday afternoon. Some different groups get together and they didn't like one another to start with, and a guy by the name of Red Hale was one of them. And from the talk I remember, he must have been pretty mean. But there was also guys in Prairie Grove that liked to fight too.
Would they fight for money or for fun or just out of dispute or what?
Just because they didn't like one another. They didn't. They'd fight over a drop of a hat, and somebody's always willing to drop the hat.
Do you remember watching these fights?
Well, I didn't see that many of them. Basically, what I remember is hearing people talk about them. There was also a couple of ladies came to town that did some fighting too. I didn't see that either, but I heard a lot about it.
What else what about the authorities? Would the police do anything, or did they kind of let it play its way out, or how'd that work?
Well, they didn't have any police in Prairie Grove. They had night watchmen. But they didn't have that much authority. In fact, the night watchmen that I remember didn't even carry a gun. They had a club and a flashlight. And I don't remember how much authority they had. But all they did was show up about dark in town and rattle doors and that sort of thing, make sure they were locked.
What about the old jail? When was that built, and was that in place then, the old jail behind the building?
I remember when the old jail was built, and it was used quite often, especially on Saturday night. They attempted to redo the old jail at one time, but I don't know how far they got with it.
Let's talk about school. Where did you go to school, and what was it like? First grade school, and then we'll go on to high school.
When I started school, we went to New Sulphur, and I went to school there through the 6th grade, and then we transferred the school there into Prairie Grove, and I went to Prairie Grove after that.
What was the school building like when you went to school?
Well, the old school building at New Sulphur, I don't remember when it was built. It was built way before my time, and it burned when I was in about the 4th grade. And they had school and a vacant home there one year, and during that time they built a new school building, and that building eventually became New Sulphur Church.
What about the high school in Prairie Grove? The school in Prairie Grove. What was it like? The school building.
The high school in Prairie Grove was an old building. It had been condemned years past, but still used until they finally got, I guess, enough money where they could build a new school. But I graduated in the old school building.
Describe the building.
This old school building was 3 stories, an old brick building, and it had begun to crumble. My dad, being a carpenter, kept the thing patched up until they got the new school building built, and then the old building was torn down.
Tell me about some of your classmates.
Well, some of my classmates were, I think we had a pretty good sized class, about 28, I believe it was. At that time, which was the biggest class they'd ever had at that point. Some people will remember, Jack Kurtzinger for one. Kermit McFarland was the shortest guy in class. And offhand, I can't remember a lot of them.
Well, what about your teachers? Do you remember your teachers?
Well, a lot of the teachers I had, Ms. J. Frank Holmes our homeroom teacher, and she taught school till she was up in her 70s.
How would they discipline children in those days?
Well, the discipline was, it could be kind of rough at times because they actually used a paddle or a switch or whatever they happened to have handy. I got a whipping one time. We were playing basketball during some of the classes. We came back from having shop, and the basketball goals was outside, and I was watching these other guys play basketball, and one of the teachers had come quieting us down out there, and get kind of rowdy playing basketball. Anyway, the male teacher came to the window and told us to go to the office. Well, all of us got a whipping, and then the principal found out that I was just watching. This was after the fact. I'd already got my whipping, and Dad had always told us that if we got a whipping in school, we'd expect another one when we got home. Well, Dad was about 6 o'clock getting home, and just right after that, the superintendent or principal showed up at the house, tell me he's sorry that he gave me the whipping because he didn't know I wasn't the one playing basketball, and that got me out of the whipping.
Any other school stories you can think of?
Well, there's probably plenty, but some of them I wouldn't want to admit to.
Where did your family go to church?
We went to the New Sulphur. It was just a non-denominational church service, and I didn't always go, but Mom tried to go. Dad didn't take part. He claimed he was too mean.
Was that a big area of social activity too in the community?
Well, at times it was, especially about Easter and Christmas and so forth.
Tell me what you and your friends did for fun when you were a young kid in Prairie Grove.
Well, the fun we had, a little different than it is now. Of course, I didn't spend much time as a child around Prairie Grove. It was mostly out in rural. A lot of things I made most of my own toys. If I wanted to play with cars or something, I made my own. Mom did a lot of sewing, and I'd take the spools, the empty spools that the thread came on, to make the wheels with. And we made our own cars, but we made roads that mainly in the road ditch. And when we came to town, I'd buy firecrackers, and I'd set firecrackers to blow up, thinking the cars or whatever, blow those up. If they tore up, well, I'd build some more.
What do you remember your parents and their friends doing for fun and social activity in those days?
Our social activity didn't amount to a whole lot. The neighbors get together. When we first got a radio about 1940, several of the neighbors get together just to listen to the radio on Saturday night. and such as that was basically what folks did.
Let's talk about after you got out of high school. What did you do then?
When I graduated from high school, there wasn't much work around Prairie Grove except maybe hauling hay in the summertime. But I took off for wheat harvest, and 2 summers there I worked out Oklahoma and Kansas in the wheat. So
What would you do?
Well, basically I drove a tractor or a combine, and whatever farming needed to be done, that's where I was at.
Well, when did you move out of the house and set up your own place and get married and stuff in Prairie Grove?
I didn't leave home until after I'd been to the service and come back. And
Let's talk about that. When did you go to the service?
I went into the service. I volunteered for the Air Force, and I was about to be drafted. And so I decided I'd rather be in the Air Force than the Army. So I went in the Air Force in 1955, got out in 1959. And I came back then to Prairie Grove and got a job with the telephone company.
Let's talk about the telephone company. When did you go to work for the phone company, and what did you do in the early days?
I worked for the telephone company for a while. Soon after I got out of high school. But back then it was mostly digging holes, setting poles, and stringing wire, and mostly iron wire to start with.
Who ran the phone company back then?
Well, back at that time, I was first hired by Donald and Barry's dad, the old man Parks. And soon after that, Donald and Barry took over. And they ran the company until about the time I retired. David Parks was old enough and got out of college, and he began to take more of the responsibility.
What year did you retire?
I retired in 1999.
Well, let's talk about the early days when you got back from service and were working full-time for the phone company. What did you do for them then?
Well, when I went to work for the phone company after I got out of the service, of course, Donald and Barry was in charge, and I started out on construction and worked construction there, building lines until they needed somebody to take over installing. That was along in the middle 60s sometime. I don't remember exactly what year, but I did, after that I did installation and repair until I retired.
What were the Parks brothers like to work for?
Well, the Parks is the best bosses I ever had. A lot of the jobs by this time, they had never done themselves, and it was up to me to figure out a way to do it and get it done. And eventually we got it done. Whether it's right or not, I don't know.
Give me an example of what you're talking about.
Well, ways, back in the early days when Donald and Barry was putting in phones, they started out putting in phones when they were the old wall type single line phones, the old crank phones, and sometime after that, when I took over about the time they started the dial system, was when I started installing phones.
About what year was that the dial system went in?
Well, the dial system was phased in because they first rebuilt Lincoln to work on the dial system, and then they started on Prairie Grove, and that's about the time that I started doing construction for it. And about the time that they started work on Farmington is when I started doing installations.
Let's talk about how they went from the crank phone to the dial, and then the party lines, and how that all worked.
When they still used the crank phones, they used to have about 10 people on a party line, and when I was on construction, they still had probably 10 people on a party line. They eventually, after a while, they got down to 8, and then they had some 4-party lines, and Prairie Grove Telephone Company was the first in the state to go to single-party lines.
About what year was that?
I don't remember exactly what year they started this process. About 1970, and it was probably 75 or 76 along in there before they got everybody changed to single-party lines.
Tell me how it would work if I lived out in the country and I wanted to make a call and I was on a party line.
Well, back in those days, if you lived in the country, you had to be on a party line because that's all there was out there. And if when they had 8 or 10 parties on the line, you had to take your turn on using the phone because the phone was usually busy. And sometimes it took maybe 30 minutes to get the line before you could use it. Unless it was an emergency, usually people would get off the line if you had an emergency to make a call.
What about the distinctive rings? When did that go into place, and when did that phase out?
Well, back in the early party line days, everybody had their own ring, like 2 longs, or 1 short and 2 longs, or everybody had their own ring. That's the reason they could only have so many people on the line, because there wasn't that many different ways of doing it.
When did they go to where it would ring at your house, even though you were on a party line?
After the dial system came in, they got to where they could ring one phone at a time, because they had different frequency ringers by that time when they could do that.
What about were there any stories you can think of about the Parks brothers? I know they did a lot of things to help people that maybe were never really publicized or other people didn't know. Are there anything you can think of stories on them you'd want to tell?
Well, there's several stories, if I had time to think back, that were the Parks boys, they'd get us out sometimes on Saturday morning and pick up trash around town if they on the roadsides. I've picked up trash several times. If it get to looking kind of bad, the Parks boys didn't want anybody to think they were responsible for it, but they'd get us out and pick up trash or mow. They mowed lots around. If they got to looking bad, Don and Barry'd get us out and get to mowing, or they'd do it themselves sometimes.
What about the battlefield park? Weren't there times that they used to mow that, or?
You know, I don't remember them actually mowing the battlefield park, but I'm sure there was times like where the old baseball diamond where they eventually built. Well, they had a rodeo ground there at one time too, up on the corner.
Where was that?
Right where they play.
Tennis?
The tennis courts are now. They kept that mowed years ago. They kept it mowed.
Let's talk about your family. Whenever you were married and raising kids, and what were some of the routines you guys would do at home and for fun and entertainment?
Well, there wasn't much entertainment back when I was growing up. I played baseball a lot in Prairie Grove, and of course during school played basketball too. I played on the town team, after I got out of high school for a while, and Dad used to do a lot of fishing, and we fished around quite a bit, especially we'd go camp out at night and set out lines and run trot lines all night.
Where would you fish?
We went to several different creeks around, mostly, of course, that was a long time before beaver and some of these lakes were put in. So we'd fish in the best small streams around.
What do you remember about the battlefield park? What's your earliest memories, and kind of talk about the history of that?
Back when I was in high school, the battlefield park was just grown up in brush. Now they had an old soldiers reunion every year back then. I guess I was gone in the service probably when they first started to, like the square dancing and all that. But back when I was growing up, the battlefield park was just a sparking place for the kids.
What other stories can you think about Prairie Grove that you could share? Maybe some of the businesses you remember going to and trading with?
Well, back when I was a kid, there was about, I think, 4 grocery stores in Prairie Grove. And one that I went to a lot was called the Hometown Grocery. And it wasn't on the main street.
Where was it located?
Well, it was on the south of where the stoplight is now. Of course, there wasn't any stoplight to start with there. They've redone old building and made apartments out of it now. It was about a block south of the intersection there, and they had a lot behind it for the wagons to park. Had places for the tie the teams up. Had places we could feed the horses or whatever.
What were the other stores?
Oh, of course, the Southern was going big then. They had furniture and hardware and everything there. I remember that when you went to pay your bill in the Southern, they had the cash register was upstairs, and they had a wire system. You send your money upstairs, and they'd send you change back.
Why'd they do it that way? For security or convenience, or?
Well, I don't know if I didn't even think about security at that time. Might have had something to do with it, all right. But they just had, of course, they had a grocery section and furniture section, whatever. Had 3 sections there, but at least 2 of those sections they sent. The cash register was upstairs, and you didn't want to have to walk upstairs to pay your bill. So they'd wire that upstairs.
What about the bank? What banks do you remember?
Well, I only remember one bank. I know there was 2 banks at Prairie Grove at one time, but the one was all I knew about. The Farmers Merchants Bank.
Tell me about Delford Reef. Was he running the bank when you were a kid?
Yeah, Delford Reef was the president of the bank. He was the first president of the bank that I can remember. He was something else to deal with. He was always willing to loan you the money. He just wanted to understand that you were supposed to pay this back.
How would he explain that to you?
He had 2 or 3 ways of explaining it. First time I went in to borrow money from the Bank of Prairie Grove, I think I was about 20 or 21, and he told me he'd let me have any money that I needed, but he expected me to make regular payments on that. As long as I understood that, he was willing to go for it.
What about Fiddler's? Did you ever shop there?
I remember when Fiddler's store was first built.
Tell me about that.
Well, I was going to junior high. It was when they built Fiddler's store. An uncle of mine helped work on that. This was quite a deal for Prairie Grove at that time. About right after the war, it's where I bought my first bicycle there. It cost me $39 and 35 cents.
Did you pay it over time, or did you pay him at one time?
No, my brother Bobby and I had worked all summer. We first started out picking strawberries, and then picked tomatoes. And about the time school started, we went in and bought one of the first bicycles sold after the war. And I think that's where my dad bought his first power saw. Instead of using a handsaw for everything, he bought the first saw, and the blade was just about that big around. I think the second skill saw sold in Prairie Grove. And we've still got that saw.
Now, after you retired from the phone company, you continued to do a lot of work helping people build houses. And how did your training from your father's teaching you the carpentry help you with all that?
Well, of course, I didn't get a whole lot of. I was around carpentry work all my life. Of course, helping my dad on different projects. He wanted me to quit the telephone company and help him. He was making 75 cents an hour doing carpentry work, and I was making 50 cents an hour working for the phone company. But I had insurance, and he didn't have any insurance. And during bad weather, when the weather got bad enough, he couldn't get out and do carpenter work outside. So he'd be sitting at home by the fire, and I'd be out helping put lines back up where the storm had tore them down, and be working overtime. Anyway, in the long run, I'd make as much money as he did, even though he got more per hour.
What year was that you were making 50 cents an hour?
That was when I first started for the telephone company back in, I think that was in 1952.
After you got back from the service, what were you making there?
After I got home from the service, things had improved quite a bit, but I don't remember what. I think I was making about around $1 an hour at that point. The telephone company paid at least as much or more than anybody for the same type of work.
What other stories can you think of, Marvin, about Prairie Grove or about the people that you knew here in town?
There's probably a lot of stories that I didn't even forgot about. I don't remember.
Do you remember when the old water tower fell on the buildings? Did you see that happen?
I was working in Lincoln the day that the water tower fell. That one of the guys that I knew and worked with, I worked on the same hay crew with him. He was an old man that had quite a bit of experience around. When they started to take the water tower down, they took some of the bolts loose at the bottom, and they were planning for the water tower to fall one direction. This old man told them that you're not going to make it fall where you want it. That you're going to have to take the bolts loose on the other side. Well, they told him that they knew what they were doing, that for him to stand back and watch. Well, he stood back and watched, and the water tower fell. It fell right across Crescent Department Store.
Who was the old man that told him that advice?
I'm not sure I can remember his name anymore.
But you weren't there to see it?
No, I was working in Lincoln. I came back about 30 minutes after it fell. Came back to Prairie Grove, and I saw it before I got into town.
That's funny. Anything else you can say before we?
Well, eventually I could think of more, but that covers more than.
If I had to ask you to describe in a couple of sentences, what are the people of Prairie Grove like? What would you tell me?
Well, some of the people in Prairie Grove are some of the finest people that I've ever met.